Well, hello everybody. This is David Bianco again, but today I'm not going to talk about music and I'm not going to talk about records, but I am going to talk a bit about technology. Wait a minute, stop the presses. What does this guy know about technology? I know that's what you're thinking. Well, part of my career was in information technology. I was actually involved in programming. I was involved in setting up systems for manufacturing plants. I was involved in running an actual network and a data center in our company, which still exists and is the US or North America data center for the company that I worked for. I was also in a corporate position where I was in charge of all of the PCs, laptops, servers, and mobile devices for our company, and even worked through contracts with companies like Dell. So I've had quite the background in this. So, although I talk a lot about music and a lot about records on this channel, and I also have a passion for safety, technology also is one of my soft spots, one of the areas I really enjoy to talk about. You see, yesterday, Friday, July 19th, we had quite an interesting day in the world, and it had to do with software. Now, I think it was amazing to me that so many people were so shocked that this kind of thing could happen, where so many systems went down that it affected all sorts of infrastructure, whether it was flights or trains or medical operations or any other type of business like banking potentially. And how could this happen? How could one company, as I heard it said, have so much control and cause this to happen? Well, the honest truth is, it isn't surprising at all, really, because we have so many dependencies on the digital world, on the internet. And in that web, and the truth is, it is a web, and in that you have the idea of a spider's web where you get kind of enmeshed in that, and then all of a sudden you can't get out. Well, the internet and the web is very similar. And the reasoning is there's a lot of pieces and parts that put that together. Now, back in the old days, so to speak, when all of this was being built in the 80s and 90s and in the 2000s, we had simpler systems because we had less complex problems. Now, part of the reason that we have the problems we have is that we are always putting into systems pieces and parts to fight problems in security, people trying to hack. And as those things have gotten worse and worse and evolved, we have had to put more and more pieces into our systems, our operating systems, in order to combat that. And truthfully, the Windows Microsoft platform has been the biggest target. Why? It's the biggest piece in the business. It's the most prevalent. You don't see as much Mac when it comes to servers. Now, I'm not talking about end users and what they use to do the work. I'm speaking of the infrastructure and the solutions that are storing databases and websites and hosting sites. This is where the pinnacle of this occurs. And so what we have with the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor product is just a small piece of software that is installed that talks to the operating system that tries to protect that system from hacking, from compromise. But like any code, the code can have an error in it. Now, that might affect the way that software operates in and of itself, or in a more extreme case, it could make an illegal call to the operating system, or have something in the code that conflicts with the operating system that causes it to crash. And so in the Windows Server environment, we see that happening in this case. Microsoft's Azure cloud platform, which is similar to Amazon's Web Services, AWS, the Azure platform all runs Windows servers. And so the Windows servers are using tools like this Falcon product in order to protect it. Well, a patch or a change was delivered through the software provider CrowdStrike that basically did something that the Windows operating system did timeout on and said, I'm going to deliver you what's called the BSOD, the blue screen of death. And that means I've got an error, I can't calculate or compute, and the operating system has said, I can't continue on. I'm not able to do that. And so when that happens, every time you reboot that system, you're going to have that same interference happening. And so until that piece of code that was uploaded to the server to patch a problem or a new feature function capability into it, until that is cleared out or rolled back, that reboot is always going to give you what's called the blue screen of death or the BSOD. So until they were able to roll that patch out and replace it with something, that is what was recurring over and over again. So this is basically how it works. But this is only one piece of software, one piece that goes into the engine that lays over the operating system to do a variety of functions. Some of those functions have to do with networking and communicating with the network cards. Some of it has to do with database capabilities. Some of it has to do with talking to the DLLs or the instructions that are set within the operating environment. So all of these pieces and parts have to be working properly and communicating properly so that the operating system can stay up and be stable. So one little error in one little piece of code can do exactly what's happened. And so in some way, some of us might say, gee, surprised it hasn't happened more often, actually. Now, the Windows environment, as I said earlier, is much more burdened in some ways by it being the biggest and the best, and the most people are going after it, much more than other operating systems like Mac or like Linux, which is a really lean operating system. And it does a lot in terms of low requirements for operating servers. It doesn't have near the overhead to it and the complexity, but it also is very free from attacks for the most part as well. So they go after the big fish. That's where the money's at. That's where the espionage is at, and that's where it happens, and that is Microsoft. But again, this one third-party company, which is being used in a platform like Azure by Microsoft for their web services, it has the potential to not work properly. And in a severe case, it can do something like what we experienced yesterday. So that's basically what has happened, and we can see the large domino effect. It's very much a hierarchy of controls and a hierarchy of instructions that have to flow properly all the time. And when someone comes and introduces a piece of code that potentially causes the operating system to say, this does not compute, I can't go any further, that's when you get that kind of error. So again, this is something that for me as a person who has worked in technology for years and even worked in corporate for years under IT and run data centers and made contracts with Dell and other companies for global capabilities for our company, this is the world we live in, and it's only gotten more and more difficult to maintain high degrees of quality and integrity. Again, sometimes I want to say it runs as well as it does, given all the variables that are involved. So hopefully this brings about just a little better understanding of what happened and the scope of what it's about, and also understanding the fact that we have vulnerabilities out there all the time. And the more dependent we are on the digital world and on the internet, the more risk there is that when something goes wrong, it's going to impact a grave amount of servers. Redundancy can help, but there are limits to that due to cost. So it isn't always easy to provide that kind of redundancy. Now, if there was capabilities to say that some of the server services were in Azure and some were in Amazon Web Services, AWS, and that particular company, like an airline or somebody, had its capabilities going through both, it probably would have experienced a slowdown, but maybe through AWS, if they weren't using those services, then they would at least have some level of performance, albeit maybe a slower response time, because the load isn't spread out as much as it is in the normal operation. So again, those kind of business decisions and redundancy of the servers you use and the companies that you use to reduce single source problems or single server or operating system problems is probably something that these organizations are going to look at a little more now that this has happened. So I hope this helps you understand it a bit. And as always, thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Take care, everybody.